Hi there, welcome to RW Mods. This is Rex Welch. I'm going to go through the FX K501R engine. Just came out here in the last month or so. Got one ordered up. I'm going to go through it and show you what this engine's about. I'm pretty excited about it, mainly with the price point on this. I removed the sleeve off this packaging. FX's packaging is pretty much the pinnacle of engines. So you open up the box, you got a foam pad here, and it comes with basically a book, absorbent sheet there, and in the book it has your serial number of your engine, connecting rod, crankshaft, main parts of the engine. The block have the serial number. Then in the packaging here we have sticker sheet, how it's made book, which is basically a nice detailed book on the machining and the requirements made to all the way the steps through the engine to make that engine. It's quite an undertaking. I'm a machinist myself, and all the specialty equipment is just crazy what they spent on this equipment. In the instruction manual, as far as engines go, it's probably one of the better manuals I've seen. It goes from start to finish. I haven't read it. I have my own ways I like to do things, but definitely a good resource. And then a parts manual. And then in the packaging itself, the engine comes nice and tidy. Looks like a little coffin here almost with the felt, but it comes with a 7mm insert, an extra shim for the head for break-in. So the engine itself looks pretty much on the outside the same as the other FX engines. They got the K5 and then the K5 DC, and then the new 3-port that just came out this fall. Outside it looks pretty much the same casting, same head. Carb looks pretty much the same too. It is a 3-needle carb, has the adjustment here. So I'm going to take the engine apart, kind of show you the internals of it. Do that quick here. Okay, I'm just going to go through this a little quick too. I still get engines in sometimes when they try and pull the back plate off, as the piston's at bottom dead center. You want to make sure the piston's up as high as it goes when you remove the back plate. Otherwise the piston will catch that groove and you'll have to use a screwdriver or whatever, pry it, and then you'll break the bottom of the skirt of the piston off. It's a noob thing that does happen once in a while. Another thing too I kind of wanted to show was people, I still see a lot of engines come apart with pry marks around the sleeve here. They're trying to get something in there. The zip tie cut straight most times will work just fine. I have a screw in the end here, the crankshaft. Put the zip tie, just drop the piston so the zip tie just barely goes in the exhaust port, and turn the engine over, pushes the sleeve up. There are some stubborn ones. Sometimes you get a stubborn one after it's been used usually, and it does require a little bit of heat. I've got a tool that I made. It's just a wider piece of Delrin that hooks that. You always want to use just plastic, something that's not going to mar the piston up or dent things, and then take the sleeve out, grab the kind of, sometimes you got to wiggle these a little bit to get the piston off, and then pull the crank out. So what we have is steel bearings on this engine. It's a budget engine, sells for $200, so they got steel bearings. the carb. Take off the cap here. The carb has looks to have a short needle carb. I think at one point they had a longer needle too. I think the original one was short, so that might be like an option you could probably try later as a tuning option. The casting, just really high quality. They have a notch out for some of the drive shafts that come close to the engine here. A lot of the engine companies are going for that. Yeah, it's a good quality piece. Looks to be the same as their $300 plus engines. As far as the specs on the FX, all of them are the same. This box is actually an older packaging that FX, they must be using the old 5K packaging, put a sticker on. So everything is the same on this. The bore and stroke, that's a pretty much standard long stroke Novarossi. Horsepower output would be close, I guess. 5 transfer ports. The only thing different would be the ceramic bearings. It does not have ceramic bearings. So one thing I'd add, it's a 14 millimeter crank. Uses a 14 by 25.8, which is a Novarossi bearing size that they use, readily available. We'll look at some of the internals of the FX engine. The crank, it's a silicone filled crank that keeps down the crank weight. Look, like I said before, it looks like it's, I mean, it feels really nice. No sharp edges. It's got, I believe, a pretty hard heat treat on it. Should keep down on the wear. It's got a nice ramp here. 14 millimeter crank. Pretty good amount of crank timing on it. The crank pin, it feels really polished and stuff, which is good. There's some of the cheaper engines that comes a little rough grind on it, which tends to wear the bushing right away at break-in until things get smoothed out. Black oxide coating is the black there. Pretty sure the DLC cranks do wear very well. OS has them, and the higher end FX engines, you virtually get no wear on those, on the crank pin. But being this engine's $200 versus $330, I think it offsets the cost pretty well. This one should hold up, I would say, 8-gallon mark or whatever, like a Novarossi Pico, some of the Italian engines. It's got a really nice grind, nice finish on it. Pretty nice. The sleeve looks, looks almost identical to the other 5-port, the original 5-port. It does have, when I go through the timing numbers, the exhaust port looks to be a 0.5 millimeter lower. Is about the only thing I see. Everything on this is just deburred very nicely. There's really not much for sharp edges inside and out. I've seen some cheap engines actually leave scratches in the piston just because they aren't deburred very well, or a little burr gets moved around or something. Piston and rod, I've ran, I actually put FX rods in an OS and stuff before. They hold up very well. The piston looks to be the same as quality as the other engines, the 3-port and the 5-port. They're fully machined. It says in the instructions it's a silicum or whatever, but that must be the European term for silicon, like a silica type that's infused with almost like a sand that they make glass out of, I believe. Some of the 1-to-1 cars, they call it a hyper-eutectic piston or whatever. So it's what that does is I've machined some full-scale engines, and it's very hard on cutters. It's very almost like it does have like some sand in it or something. So it wears very well. In the FX engines I've ran in the past. They hold their pinch very well, just so long, just as good as the top engines. One thing on the rod, this one takes a 30mm rod. That's bushing to bushing. The original FX had a 30mm rod. The 3-port takes a 29.5mm rod. So you can't just throw any FX rod in. Make sure you got the right one, or you're going to be a 0.5 millimeter short. So yeah, so looking at the head, looks to be about the same as the other FX heads. Some might not have this cut on the outside, but looks like the same quality. A little different in low engraving on the top here. It's a low CG head, pretty standard, drilled, lightened, nothing cheap here really. They do, FX just recently this fall came out with some low heads, kind of like the OS, little different styles. They sell different fin heights ones, so you could have a couple different heads for your track conditions or whatever temperature you're running at and stuff. So I think overall the engine, as I said, the sleeve looks to have a little bit lower exhaust port, which should give you a little more bottom end. The little less top end. That's pretty easily fixed. If the FX engines, when they first came out, they I think looked at the top performing engines, probably the OS XZB, and they kind of used similar timing numbers, and came up with an engine that was, their first one was good in a truggy and a buggy, which is something that you want if you're going to sell one engine. Then the 3-port, good buggy engine, a little better mileage I think on that 3-port, and then the 501R here has a little lower exhaust port, which is probably a little more universal. It'll run good in a buggy and truggy. It is with a little modifying, raising that exhaust port really isn't that big a deal too. So a mod, with maybe doing some blending on the crank and raising the exhaust port would benefit for maybe a buggy. This engine modified would be pretty good. You're looking at like 260 for a modified engine. That's pretty good, and probably as good as most engines, quality wise, even the $500 ones. So that would be a good way to go. This engine does not need modifying to be competitive, though. If you like the power band and this and that, that's one thing with the modified. People buy a modified engine just because they want a modified engine. Well, if you ran an engine, say you ran this engine, I could use a little more top end for this track, and it depends on your track and your traction and all that. So I suggest running an engine first. Hey, could we improve the mileage? Could we improve the top end? I need a little more bottom end for my truggy, things like that. So that's kind of the overall on that. Looking at the timing numbers, I compared them to the FX K5 and then the K5 Racer and then the OS Speed Spec 2. And looking at the numbers, we got the exhaust height, like I said, is a little bit lower, which the number is bigger. That's measured from the top down, almost a 0.5 millimeter. Transfer ports are all pretty close, comparing the Speed Spec 2, and then going on to the boost ports are just a few degrees there. The blowdown on the Racer here is a little less, 38 versus 45. That's your exhaust port height. That's the exhaust port to the transfer ports below down, and so with that exhaust port being lower, the blowdown's a little less. Crank opening, pretty close, 151, 150, 152. Closing is actually pretty close too, and overall induction timing actually has a little bit more. It's pretty easy measuring wise. You can measure the same engine twice and get, you know, a degree difference in your timing there too. So they're pretty close. You're not gonna tell a degree or two difference. I'm sure quite a few people don't know, that's we'll take the carb out of this and show you. One thing too, just since I'm doing this, anytime you take a carb out, new engines don't come too tight, but you have trouble, a lot of guys have trouble getting the carb out. You want to loosen up the screw, push it. You might need to bang on it pretty good. Push the back tightener out, and then so you push that out, and then you take and you turn the carb clockwise, and that takes this wedge and pushes it out. See, if you're if this one's tight and you're trying to tighten it this way, it's just trying to tighten itself. So most times you can get most carbs out by pushing that screw out and then turning clockwise. So when I talk about induction timing, that's the crank opening. See if I can get it in the picture here. When you're looking down and you can see the crank window opening up, and that's your intake opening and your closing. Oops, I'm not in the picture here. Your closing. So that's your opening, closing, and then the total degrees. So overall, I'm pretty excited to run this engine. It's winter time here in Minnesota, and I won't run one for quite a while, but I will have them for sale. And this one actually I'll have for sale after I get it back together here and get this video up. I think for the money, this engine is probably the best out there. I'm without running it. I know the rods are strong. Everything about these is just quality, and I think, you know, the crank being it's not coated, it's not going to last as long, but I think for the $200 price range versus 300 plus, you can just buy another engine a little bit sooner and you'll still have a fresh engine. One thing I didn't touch on was the carb. Here's the bottom side of the carb since I got that out. It's a really nice machine piece. I do kind of like the all aluminum body. And these carbs tune really good. My first experience with them was, and I have some videos, some older videos when the FX first came out, is they just idle very well. I borrowed an engine to the guy, my test engine. When I first got it, when they first came out, I borrowed it to a guy. I said, we were at a place where the driver stands quite a walk from pit lane. You had to walk around and back up. And I told him, I said, just throw it down, let it sit there and idle. Walk up there, it'll be idling, it won't load up. And he doubted me, and he did that. He raced it that weekend, but he said when he first threw it down, he did what I said and walked around, and I mean, it takes almost a couple minutes, at least a minute, to get up there. And he said, by God, it just idled, it didn't load up. But he said he ended up leaning it out 4 hours from where that was. So even at 4 hours rich, it still idled very well and didn't load up. So one thing I think the FX does lack a little bit, the 5 ports, mileage wise, tend to be a little towards the bottom end of the scale. They're not terrible, but that's one thing where the speeds do have them a little bit is on mileage. Not sure if it must be mostly in the carb, as my guess. So as I'm playing around with the carb settings, and probably not, they run so well rich too that maybe they're not leaning them out quite enough too. I know they played around with the needles, so that might be like an option maybe to try fine-tuning with the needle a little bit too. So thanks for watching. We're gonna start doing some more reviews of engines. Got another one on the way, being shipped now too, so we're gonna do a review on another engine and then look for more into 2018, and let us know what you think. Thank you.